will be done in the freshman seminar throughout the first year, and the last part of it will be done in the capstone course. But we gave the middle part to the departments and asked them to create some places in their curriculum where they would reinforce the core values. And so we have a committee that awards money for these projects. And so that's one way I get feedback from the departments about what they're doing. And so I asked 2 departments that were particularly active in this and had built a lot of things around it in the department to come and talk to you so you could get some ideas about what they've done and what they have funded. So Tom Doolittle is gonna go first. One of the departments that was right on the ball and started giving us proposals right away, right at the very beginning, was Christian Ministries. And of course, Christian Ministries kind of has an advantage in that that's what they do. So putting scripture into practice in the real world is what they do. So they already had a lot of things that were oriented in this direction. The other department that I asked to participate was history, humanities, and political science, because that's maybe not as obvious about how you would structure things in the department to achieve the core goals. But they had a lot of ideas that they put out there, and these are kind of contrasting, but I think they'll be interesting. So we're going to start with Tom.
This is a reluctant presentation because the goal is to inspire you to ask for monies, which means there'll be less monies for us to get next time. But actually, I would hope we can encourage you to do that. We've had a great, I think, success with the QEP funding sources. Our department does kind of fit with much of the QEP, as she mentioned, that the idea of faith integration and vocation is common to us. We do it throughout our curriculum almost. And then when you look at a redemptive service and a few of the other components, we always have been emphasizing those. So we might have had a kind of a framework that made it a little easier and quicker to do. What I'm going to do is we have 2 from our department. Jerald Daffe is going to talk. He's the coordinator of the pastoral ministries discipline, and I'm the chair. If I could, I would have had Edley here too, because Edley and Jerry were the 2 that did the most work with this in our department. But Edley had a double dip on his situation today. One is he was supposed to be in another session, and then he also has been under the weather. So. But Edley handles the intercultural studies. So consequently, I'm going to talk about their stuff. And before I do that, I want to tell you a little bit about our process. When this information was given out, the chairs, I think, initially got the scenario, then it went to the whole faculty, etc. But I started working on that right away, telling our department what was coming. And especially worked with our discipline coordinators to make them aware that they could request things that anybody else could also request per class but we would channel it through a discipline coordinator in some way, or if it was something I had to manage, I would. But by and large, this was run through our discipline coordinators, and we have 4 disciplines in our group right now. There's youth ministry, discipleship, pastoral ministries, and intercultural studies. And so these 4 groups, I met with them. I actually had a good bit of dialogue with them to make sure they understood the process. Carolyn was excellent in resourcing us and being very patient and not acting like my questions were dumb. And very patient, by the way, whenever we maybe did something not exactly like by the process initially, they were good at correcting us or giving us suggestions in a very friendly way, because they want this to succeed. That's why she's having this session. They want more people to get involved. You're going to look at humanities stuff later, but you can see what all they've done, and that'll be talked about. And we had kind of a similar thing in our group with, if you look at what all we did, it was quite a list. So the first round, all of our discipline coordinators really got involved. And what I'm going to talk about a little more is about the second round, because at this time, 2 of the disciplines I don't think made application for monies this year. That was youth and discipleship. But initially, we had all of them do it. And this is Edley's request. He is a very thorough guy. He did like 10 pages, But he wrote, so you won't think it's single space and a lot. He just did it like this. But so I told them that these are initial instructions back when we started. you can make a wish list. There are no restrictions initially, except for these real broad parameters. So what they did was they made the wish list, and then I kind of met with some of them and said, that's wishing a little much, I think, you know. But they wished big, they did. And some of the requests, of course, weren't funded, and then but much of them were. And so the better the requests, more likely it got funded, but they tweaked them until all of them basically got stuff that would help the department. The goal of this QEP funding is first and foremost, how does it help the QEP be integrated into the students' learning processes, either through activities, service, or curriculum. And so what our group especially focused on, or I should say Italy, is they looked at their courses, and most of us designed most of this to work through various courses. So what Italy did is he designed this, and I'm going to go through, because he basically renewed his again. And he did like a intercultural studies course 254, and in that they put a funding for travel to the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta that would focus on the QEP component of integration of faith and vocation, and with the idea of impacting responsible citizenship. You can kind of logically see how to expose them to the life and teachings of Martin Luther King would fit with this. Well, this fits with our program too, because intercultural studies does a lot with inter-urban ministry, which the center, you know, the Martin Luther King Center, it was a urban center, ministry center really, probably still is in a lot of ways, if you broaden the word ministry. But I'm talking about, he was a pastor in inner city Atlanta. Of course, the civil rights works with the intercultural programs, emphasis on social justice, community action, and then we tied that to redemptive service. And then they had another course, an elective they developed, where they went to Atlanta and Knoxville to expose them to mosque, to help them understand the Muslim people and their faith, and to get to know them and see how that could tie in to responsible citizenship. Because they usually get surprised that many people are surprised when they go to a trip like this to find out people are people everywhere. You follow me? Most people are just like you. They want a good life, relationships that are significant, a life that really matters, and provision and protection for their families. And when you find the commonality and stuff, it helps our students look at some of the issues that are going on in our country through different lens. And then he did a contemporary world religion course where he developed this in conjunction kind of with similar experiences. Well, let me go on to tell you a few more things he did. He has a retreat. At the retreat, they go in more depth than this. He had a trip class. It was a junior level class where they actually go in and do service in inner city Atlanta, and they have to interact with folks there. I think Rolando in the intercultural studies led this one. It's an urban evangelism course where they took 4 trips to Dalton to actually work with Hispanics who are second and third generation. And they do community activities with them as well as some ministry things. And they want to work with this second, third generation Hispanics born in the country so they could see how they could relate and help assist them. One of my favorites they did was they took a 400 level class called Church and Urban Transformation to Atlanta, and they did some work in East Cleveland to do ethnographic research in the poorest sections of Atlanta as well as in East Cleveland. And the goal was to find practical solutions for problems in relation to ethical actions. So Italy then proposed this, and they received funding, and they received quite a hefty sum for all these projects. If you apply for more, that money has to be spread around for, and we're glad to do that. But I hope this gives you some ideas. Jerry's going to take over and tell you what he did in the discipline of pastoral ministry.
When you've taught over 4 decades and have run through at least 4 SACS evaluations, you always wonder what comes next. Writing across the curriculum wasn't a problem. That was pretty easy to institute. Critical thinking, that was pretty easy too, and it stretched us. But Quality Enhancement Plan, QEP, that was a totally new challenge, especially probably for some of us who are in disciplines where there isn't money that anybody ever offers you to apply for. I've been teaching a long time and they've never said, can we apply this for pastoral studies? That just doesn't work. Tom shared how he brought together all of the coordinators. We saw what we were supposed to do, and then since there are 3 coordinators in our suite, we'd go back to the suite and commiserate how in the world were we ever going to do this. It took us a little while to grasp, especially for me, what might be the options. Carolyn came to our meeting and she said, you guys do this. And I'm thinking, we don't ask for money. But eventually the light came on and I realized that maybe here was a great time, one of the greatest times ever in all my teaching to get money to do things that we thought we could do, but in a greater way. So our pattern wasn't to start something new, but to take 3 courses that we already had and do something better with it. First of all, we do have a course called Pastoral Seminar, which deals with spiritual gifts, and built into it is the fact that they always go on retreat. We go for a 22-hour retreat up in the mountain. We have plenty of food, fun, study, spiritual activities, and the students always said, we wish we could come back for a second time, and we didn't have the means for that. But with the redemptive service part, we said, wait a moment, if we can get the money, we can bring back students who've already been through this class and bring them back for a neat experience, but give them something new. Started to check out, and we have some alums that are definitely involved in redemptive service. Last time we brought in Brian Downings, who has started a replant of a church in a suburb of Atlanta, and they're doing some really neat things, and I wanted our students to know about it. For example, on Christmas morning, their church takes breakfast hot dishes to Starbucks in their area, to CVS, and say, we appreciate your being at work when we need you, and we want to do this. And they've been doing that now for several years, and the expansion of the church is almost unbelievable by those particular items. I thought that our students needed to meet Brian and see what they're doing. They're also doing, cooperating with a home for unwed mothers. They are also working with something that's called Baby in a Box. If there's an unwanted child, they can take it to this box and leave it, and they're working with that. So we brought Brian in, and he was a 2007 grad. And we had a separate setting for alums. Initially, we opened it to pastoral ministry majors, and then when we had room for more, we brought in majors from seniors from the other 3 disciplines in our department. We had a tremendous response, plus they have been invited to come down to Atlanta to visit with Brian, call him, and get a feel for that. This next year, because we've got the funding, we're going to do the same, and we're going to bring back a 2014 grad, Nick McLean, who has been always wanting to do benevolence, graduated and said there's no place. He said, I'm doing the same job I'm doing now that I did when I left for Lee. But he got hired at the Dream Center, and he and his wife Brianna, both pastoral majors, they're going to be coming to our retreat to share a whole different dimension of redemptive service. So that was really great for us. That has been just a tremendous highlight. The other class that we said, we have a class called Church of God History and Polity. And, you know, you can study it theoretically and knowledge-wise, but we're so close to the founding of the church. It's history. And so we said, well, what if we were to make it possible for these students to see what they have been hearing about? And so we got a small amount of money that we were able to, Henry Smith handles that, put them on a bus, and they went out on a Sunday afternoon and enjoyed all the facilities of Ducktown and all the initial places. This really added a dimension. And those of you know that when you academically you study about something and then you get to see it, it just adds a whole new dimension to it. The third area that we really are excited about has to do with our internships. all of our students have to do a 10-week internship in a local church. One of the struggles we've had is how do you connect the student and the supervising pastor before they ever actually go to that place? And so we thought if we could develop a method so they could see each other ahead of time, and then when they come back and have some kind of debriefing, this would really add, plus we were able to emphasize the redemptive service part. So the committee was very, very gracious in giving us money so that what we're doing now, all of our interns who are going to go out for their internship, they will meet. We met on a Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon at a retreat setting. We brought in supervising pastors. We brought in a special speaker who would talk to them what it means to be nurturing and developing spiritually. And then, now after they come back in September, we're going to bring them all back together again to evaluate. Was this a good experience? How can we improve? What do we need to do better? It's just getting off the ground, so we're going to see how it happens in September. But the committee has graciously allowed us, we're going to do the same thing this coming year. We did not do anything that was tied to faculty. We did not do anything that was tied to some new program as such. We worked at saying, how can we enhance what we have? We think we have some good things, but we never had the money to make it better. And like I said, this was the first time we ever had an opportunity to get some extra money to really put it. Students have been elated. The fact that we're able to bring them back to retreats, bring them back to new things, it is one of the neatest things that happened. But the real issue was I had to get on board. It was a whole new thing. I'm not a fundraiser. I don't ask people for money. Well, there was no one to ask, so you couldn't. And once I caught what could be done, then all of a sudden it started to evolve. We've talked, again, Tom has been so supportive and encouraging other coordinators in the major as we dialogued, and we're probably at an advantage in Christian ministries because the coordinators, we all are so close in proximity that, we pop out of our offices, we talk to each other, and I think that has been another part of it. Now, do we have thoughts for the future? Yeah. But we're not going to expand so quickly that we don't do a good job on this. And if we can get this up and rolling right, like it, then we'll probably expand again. So if you don't ask for any money, we are. For me, it was a stretching experience to do this. But it has been really rewarding. I still don't like doing paperwork. I don't like filling out all those things, but when I know it's going to make a difference, then it makes it a whole lot easier. I think what I could say is if you have an idea, bounce it, try it. My goodness, I did not expect as much positiveness from the $4,100 we got $4,041 this next year. I did not expect that positive return in that extent that we have. So it has been great for us. And again, our chair has been very, very supportive, encouraging us, and be happy to share details. And of course, there's going to be some Q&A in a little bit. Okay.
Let me mention something real quick. He might add to this, but the pastoral retreat they do that annually. But this new addition with students that could not previously go, as he mentioned. But what's interesting is their participation was not directly tied to a class. This is actually something, technically, it is brand new, even though it's part of Old Component. In other words, they have the framework that they had of the previous retreat, but this was totally new. And what was responses you got actually from these students who got to go to this part of the retreat that had never been done?
Can we come back next year? That was one of the common ones. They were, first of all, so appreciative of the fact that we would be able to invest in them in that way. And then they really, really liked the fact that we brought back a previous grad who wasn't, who was had plenty of experience, but still seemed to identify with them, and that just was, I think, one of the real strengths.
And this funding allows for Nick and his wife to come, they're actually paying their travel expenses and stuff.
Yeah, and an honorarium, and we've been able to provide some study materials for them, and
You guys supply some things for the participants too, right?
yes, we're already ready next year for, since it's the 25th annual retreat, I already have the t-shirts at hand and the pens and all those things we're gonna do it right.
Some of that's from different funding, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, the Intercultural Studies class 292, I mentioned, I should have said, they created that class in conjunction with being able to get QEP funding. That's an elective, it's not a required course, but it's a 2-hour elective that build in those travels to Atlanta and stuff. So you can get real creative too and do something new.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know?
So I'm representing the Department of History, Political Science, and Humanities on behalf of Randy Wood, who is moving Calvin into the dorm. Calvin, who was a toddler when I had Randy for class 16 years ago. So there's a kind of some disorienting feel to being up here talking to you in his place. But so I don't think I can give the kind of comprehensive perspective on what our department is doing that Randy might be able to give, but I still want to give you an idea of what the department as a whole is doing, and then give you a little bit of information on what we as a humanities discipline are doing. I can relate to some of the concern, the anxiety about how exactly to approach the QEP in those initial conversations 2 years ago in the fall of 2014. I remember at the time we were thinking, well, there are 3 ways we could go. One is to try to do a big project at the departmental level, do something very intentional that all of our students across 3 disciplines would be exposed to, so they would encounter the same ideas, conversations, practices, and there are obvious benefits to that. You've got coherence, you've got some consistency and uniformity in the experience of the students, but it would have involved a lot of work, and one concern of ours was that we were already doing quite a few things that we felt related directly to the goals of the QEP that would suffer if we were to divert our attention to some new project. So we opted, much like Christian ministries, to identify things that we were already doing in our disciplines that related to the university's core values of ethical action, redemptive service, responsible citizenship, and to try to find ways in which to do those things better, and to be more intentional about connecting them to the goals of the QEP. And so we sort of went off in our disciplines and identified some areas for, I guess we could call it QEP enhancement. And I've listed here, I think this is only a partial list of all of the things we're doing that we initially proposed. These are the ones for which we've either requested or received funding. I don't know that we've received funding for all of these, but these are the ones for which we've requested funding. And I thought what I might do is just go through an example from each of the disciplines in our department, and then I'll focus on the humanities, which I know best. First, in political science has the annual Constitution Bowl, which they were already doing. They receive federal funding for this. It happens on Constitution Day, which is one of the prerequisites for receiving federal money. And this is an opportunity for their students to invite area schools to the campus and to host a quiz bowl. And they have students volunteer, and I think there's service hours connected to this, but volunteer to write questions, facilitate the quiz bowl, be responsible for inviting all of the schools and coordinating the event. And obviously this relates directly to the university's core value of responsible citizenship. But what about redemptive service? Now here's a way in which we can take students who are already receiving service hours for participating in this event and say, now, is writing out a question for a quiz bowl redemptive service? And the answer is not necessarily predetermined. Some may say yes and some may say no, but a lot of thinking and theologizing will have to go into that response. And so we can connect a short reflection paper to this already existing event and get them to engage in the goals of the QEP. Another thing that political science was already doing that relates directly to redemptive service. They have a sort of Deke Day style event in October called Random Acts of Service, in which all of their students come together on a Saturday and do service projects for a day. And this was one way to reinforce the university's emphasis on service, but also to promote collegiality and camaraderie within the department. And so now this is one of our QEP enhanced events in that discipline. And Model UN, again, obviously connects to responsible citizenship. We have usually have in March a team that is given a portfolio on a country. They go to New York and participate in a Model UN session, and they have to represent knowledgeably within the context of their training as political scientists, but also empathically and also articulately the interests of that country. And so this is a way to connect this existing event to our university's core value of responsible citizenship by asking them to reflect on that when they come back to campus. Anyway, political science already had 3 really strong events that they were able to enhance in light of the QEP goals. For history, it was a little less obvious, and I can't speak on their behalf, but it seems to me that it was a little less obvious. And so history decided to enhance some of the things they were already doing, and then to start some new extracurricular activities in light of the QEP. One of the events that they have, I think, become well known for in the community is the cemetery tour, annual cemetery tour in the Fort Hill Cemetery. That happens usually the week of Halloween, and then the spring house tour in the Historic Homes District. And so these were 2 events that history had been doing for more than a decade, and for which their students had been receiving service hours and in some cases course credit for researching and performing. And so now here's an opportunity to get those students engaged in these standing activities to reflect on how their service here relates to the project of promoting responsible citizenship on the one hand, and I think the idea of service to the local community on the other, reminding Cleveland of its past, being there when that family whose last name is the same as the tombstone you're standing in front of, whose ancestor you're representing, how that represents a kind of service, and asking them to reflect a bit more deliberately on how that, in fact, is an expression of our university's core value of redemptive service. So that's one of the things that they did that was already existing. Something I thought was just very simple and probably didn't require a lot of funding. This is Bob Barnett's project. We'll call it newspaper literacy. That's not his term, that's mine. We're talking about responsible citizenship, he says, but none of these students even read the newspaper. And they get their news from the Daily Show. Of course, there's no longer a Daily Show. Why don't we just get a subscription to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal? You got to have both perspectives, right? So in the pod now, we have a subscription to the Times and the Wall Street Journal, and you'll come in, you'll find students sitting there reading the Wall Street Journal, which is really funny for me. So I think they should be reading Homer, but anyway, okay. So anyway, obviously, this is something very simple, but a little bit imaginative, I think, that relates directly to fostering the value of responsible citizenship. Another opportunity that really fell into the lap of our department and the discipline of history in particular is a symposium that Maryville's been hosting for the last decade, I think a little longer, that was started by Ron Wells, a historian who worked at Calvin College for most of his career and then sort of retired and had a second career in Maryville. He had a relationship with Bob Barnett and John Coates in the department, Jason Ward, and so when he chose to finally retire, emphatically retire, he invited them to take over this symposium on faith in the liberal arts that he's been running for the last 12 years. And so this is an opportunity for our department and really for the university. I know some of us in this room are probably involved in this event this fall in connecting an existing event that gets a lot of attention and promoting it in light of our university's core values. So this is going to be a kind of work in progress, but something we'll hear more about this fall. So let me say a little bit about humanities, which is the area I know best, and this is the area in which we had to do the most work. Humanities major is relatively new. We now have a classics major. Both of these are housed under the discipline of humanities. And we had a few things that were existing that we wanted to tinker with, but for the most part, we've had to build some extracurricular events and conversations and discussions intentionally in light of the QEP goals. And one of the things that I think has been most useful to our students, one of the easiest things, one of the least expensive things, for which we've had to request just a little bit of money for pizza, we call Faculty Fridays, which is lame, I know, but there it is. Faculty Fridays was initially designed to be a response to these stories we kept hearing of our graduates leaving Lee feeling really well prepared for graduate school from an academic perspective, and then from a faith perspective just feeling like they had entered this crisis. And it's not that we hadn't tried to prepare our graduates for that kind of experience, but we wanted to be much more intentional about sharing our own stories, our own academic journeys, our own intellectual journeys with our students in a more kind of almost confessional way. And the model for this, for me, was a book by C.S. Lewis that some of you've probably seen called Surprised by Joy, where he shares his own. It's not really a memoir, it's not really a biography, it's his own kind of psychological and intellectual journey from the time he was a little kid up through his conversion. And so Mary and Aaron and I, my colleagues in humanities, said, why not get together twice a semester and have one of us, or maybe a colleague in another discipline, share a story of our intellectual journey at least from college to where we are now. What are some of the crises we've encountered along the way? What are some of the ways in which our faith, our commitment to a local church, to family, what are some of the ways in which those commitments are often held in tension with our commitment to our disciplines and our academic training? And so we were already trying to do this, and we had had a couple semesters and several iterations of this event, and it was, I would hesitate to say wildly popular, but it was well received. And we decided to connect this to the QEP, solicit QEP funding, and focus our Faculty Fridays on the university's core values. And so sometimes our conversations are going to be more tangentially related and sometimes more directly related to the core values. But last year we invited one of our alum, Aaron Simmons, who is actually a graduate in history, 2000 graduate, I think 99, 2000 graduate, who's a philosopher at Furman University, and he was also our homecoming honorary, what do we call that? Honorary, what is it? Distinguished alum of the, I knew something elaborate. Invited him to come back and essentially do what we had been doing with the Faculty Fridays, and had a really, I think, a challenging conversation with Aaron Simmons in Aaron Johnson's home the weekend of homecoming, and our students were able to come and listen in on that conversation, participate in it, and that was one of the things we did immediately. We also had an existing lecture series that was somewhat defunct that we wanted to revive in connect explicitly to the QEP goals, the Humanities Lecture Series, otherwise Untitled Lecture Series. And so last year, this was one of the events that was funded, and rather than have an outside speaker come in and sort of orate, we chose to have two authors who have a kind of running disagreement between them. Joe Kikasola, who is in charge of film studies at Baylor University, and David Dark, who's a local author, Nashville. And to have them come have a conversation, a very candid conversation about their intellectual journeys. So this was kind of Faculty Friday on steroids. And we brought in these two speakers to do this and have an argument in front of students in the Johnson Lecture Hall. And that was very well received. And we also had a lot of our students from core classes attend this event and submit reflection papers. And we asked them to connect those, in some cases, tangentially to the QEP. Others are self-explanatory. Well, here, reading discussion groups. This is not so self-explanatory. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Aaron Johnson last spring requested QEP funding for a reading group. We tried to buy books for as many of our students as possible. Ultimately, we had to restrict this to sophomores and juniors, which is the target group of the sort of phase 2 of the QEP. But we bought 4 books for students, each of which related in some way to the QEP. I'm trying to remember them now. I should have written these down. George Marsden on the idea of a Christian scholar. Can't remember the author's name. A Long Way Gone is actually a story of a child soldier in Sierra Leone. Jamie Smith, Faith in a Secular World, and what is the third one? I'm forgetting. N.T. Wright, Surprised by Scripture. So these were all books that had significant portions of the books related directly to our university's core values, and this was a way to invite students to get a free book and read the book outside the context of a class, read it voluntarily, read it out of curiosity, and then come together and have a spirited conversation with us. And the first sort of response to this was so enthusiastic that we wondered whether we might order twice as many books and invite faculty to do it as well. And so that was something we were able to do in the spring. We had faculty discuss the books usually the evening before or the lunchtime the day before we discussed the books with students. And we had faculty from business and from the sciences and math and theology represented there, and was an opportunity to foster some interdisciplinary discussion. But these are the things that we've been doing. It's a kind of ad hoc list. I was really surprised to hear that we made the list of best practices because there was a lot of sort of anxiety about this, and I don't think anyone in our department took it lightly or wanted to get out of work. But we were concerned with protecting things that we were already doing and saw the QEP as an opportunity to focus on those and do them better rather than give up things in favor of starting something new. So that's in general been our approach. And I suppose we can...
Question and answer, sure.
Questions?
No?
Do you have any questions for any of us?
I appreciate the ideas I've been writing, how this may, as you said, something that you have done, it has sparked something in my brain's discipline specific, that, oh man, we could do that, or try this. I may have, Carolyn may get like this big, like, noveness that I cannot give you $40,000.
We can
But-
settle that right now.
No, I don't even have to send her an email, right? Like, I know the answer to that. But it is helpful when you're new to this and like we have some new ideas, and then like you were just saying, we want to protect stuff that we've been doing and try to tie it in. We do QEP all day long in nursing. So it's hard to differentiate and say, oh, okay, I'm gonna do this. So we have to get creative and try to tie stuff in.
And I suppose the big challenge, and I studiously avoided this, is the assessment part, which is going to be a part of the, I guess, the conversation. And the months to come. And we'll be talking about our e-portfolio platform later today, but it's, now we have to think about how do we get something on paper from students that we can begin to assess.
And that's the hard part.
That's the hard part.
It's really the hard
And that's the
part.
part we don't like, cause I don't
No.
like that either.
Actually, this year I'm going to do something right on the moment of the event and have forms for them right away. I'm not going to use email reminders or anything, just I can have my secretary type them out, but I'm going to do it right on the spot. The other thing is, I was surprised it did not take that much extra work to put the QEP in effect in these areas. Because if you already have the structure laid out, you know, we already had the retreat site, we already had one side going, all I had to do was add a second area to it. And the others who were operating, it just was not as much work as I initially thought it would be. And that makes it so much more exciting to think, okay, can we do something extra if funds are available?
When I'm at the faculty, I emphasize to all of them not to submit something that you don't want to assess and do paperwork for. And so, you know, that was up front, and
Right.
so that's why we had I think the best in our department present stuff, you know.
I'm trying to remember the third area of the QEP. There's the citizenship, the service, and the,
Ethical
Ethical
action.
action.
I'm sorry?
Ethical action.
Ethical action.
Oh yeah, ethical action. I should remember that. Teach it. I was wondering though, why you chose redemptive service, to bring a speaker in, and if the QEP applies then both to the students learning about redemptive service as well as doing redemptive service. Does it work both ways?
Well, when you, Jerry speak this better, but when you do something like that, you gotta remember, you're talking about what you're willing to assess. It doesn't mean that's all you're doing. It just means this is the item that we're targeting and we're gonna focus on to make sure that happens. So, when he did that, on redemptive service, or when Edley did that, that's what they particularly thought with the curriculum or goals of the class, that's what they wanted to highlight. But, you know, they're doing many other things in there, including, some of these classes will hit on every aspect of the QEP.
Yeah, it
Some may be really narrowly focused.
Okay, okay.
I chose redemptive service especially for the thought of bringing in extra students into the retreat setting, due to the fact that I knew there were people out there that they would never get to hear unless I brought them there. They're not going to go down to the Oakdale Church and see what's happening, but because of who Brian was, he's an outgoing, interactive person, appears not that much older than them, but he is, that it would give them new insight. It's not like me sitting up there or someone else. They're having someone, you're actually doing it. And of course, in the ministry students, the big thing always is, have you done it? And they've been asking that question. As I teach pastoral ministry, always they say, well, have you experienced that? Or do you know someone who has? So that's why I wanted to bring these people in who are actively doing it. And when they aren't that far away from being here on the campus, it really adds an extra dimension. And especially when they're invited to come down and be part of it.
I was curious, I know, we've decided 40,000 is too much, but what was the average kind of amount that got funded out of your programs?
Well, I don't know if we can do it, if I did average, it'd be kind of widespread because some
Yeah,
of them are
it would
small.
depend.
But the intercultural studies got about $10,000, I think.
10,000, okay, so that was the high, what was the low?
And that goes down each year because there's less monies available each year.
Okay.
And part of that was because of the number of fund requests. I think Carolyn can address that more, but if it had been more funding, it would have been a lot less and some of these wouldn't have been funded. But I think we had one as small as $600 or $700 for a program. Then we have one about, I think, they actually got funded about 1,000. Jerry told you his was about
4,000.
Okay.
That was for all of them though, right? That was for all 3 projects?
Yes.
Yeah, and Italy and them, of quite, I mean, they wrote in so many projects, none of these projects got a lot of money. They just wrote up a lot, expecting there'd be so many requests, they'd only get some of them. And, they were written real well, though. Edley is very, very good, as Jerry is, at doing the paperwork. And, Jerome's back here, Jerome Boone, he chaired the department 15 years. He's the one who established these processes being done well, so I don't wanna take credit for that. That's really his mentoring, and Jerry was chair of the department at one time, Edley's director of the IS program. So these people have done a lot of paperwork, all of these people.
What are the timeframes? Do you apply for the year and then?
Carolyn needs to answer that.
Yeah, let me see just a little bit about the funding. You know, the first year, we just said, okay, we sent to the department chairs and kind of announced in faculty, if you wanna apply for some funding, apply for funding, and here's the deadline. And we had way more money than we had requests. So then we opened it up and said, okay, well, I'll let you try it again. So then we had a second round of funding. So we did one, I think in the fall, and we did one in January, February maybe. And so then we did another one for this year, and we had a whole lot more requests for this year for funding for 16, 17 than we had for 15, 16. So we have sort of assigned most of the money for this year, but not all of it. And also, a lot of times people, you know, they kind of ask for a certain amount and then they don't need all that, so we get some of it back at the end, or you know, they don't spend it all. So there is still some money. I would definitely say, we don't have a deadline. We haven't set a deadline for applying for what we have. Of course, we don't get to keep what we had left over from last year, but what's not assigned for this year. But we will do that. We will do that fairly soon. And let me also say, the Quality Enhancement Plan, the purpose of the Quality Enhancement Plan across the Southern Association is to take something that you're doing and do it better. And so that's when ours is integrative learning. We think we've got some great stuff in our curriculum. Our students just don't get the connections. What's service got to do with study abroad? What's study abroad got to do with the capstone class? So what we're trying to do is make that all tie together. So as many of these examples will show you, they didn't start something new. And the objective isn't, let's see how much new stuff we can put in. Because we think our curriculum and our curricular, extracurricular thing is already pretty heavy. And we are, if you look at the high impact practices by the AAC&U, we have most of them. Freshman seminar, capstone course, student faculty research, study abroad, internships. We have most of that already. So what we're trying to do is, let's weave this all together better so that when our students graduate, they know that we were trying to teach them these three things, if nothing else. So the redemptive service, ethical action, and responsible citizenship. So a lot of these things they were already doing, but now they're doing it with that in mind. So yeah, this fits right in. And I think, of course, nursing, you can see all kinds of ways in which what you're doing fits in. And so as you look at what you're already doing in the department, we're not trying to put another big burden on you. We're just trying to say, well, how about taking this activity and orienting it toward this? So most of this, for both departments, most of it's not entirely new. In some cases, like humanities, they hadn't, because it's such a new discipline, they hadn't thought it through, but now they have. And so, you know, we're not asking for new programs and more stuff every single time. Also, the way we're assessing the QEP, we do want you to give us feedback on what you do and whether this worked and what did kids think at the end of it. But for the whole assessment of the QEP, it's pretty global. We're giving them a big essay question in their capstone class to find out, what do you think about all this stuff? So we have assessments along the way, but to really assess the QEP, what we want to know is, did our students get the connection of these core values, and were they learning it along the way as they went through their program? So that our assessment's kind of global. So we're not going to find out, oh yeah, it looks like that colloquium and faith and vocation, that did not pan out, because they, you know, it's not going to be that microscopic. So anyway.
Can I add one thing? You know, one of the concerns is, okay, are we simply, well, this is my concern about your perception of us, for example, when we solicit funds in support of something we're already doing. Are we simply taking something we're already doing and trying to get QEP money to fund it, even if that is your intent, simply having that QEP goal behind it changes the nature of the event a little bit. You have to solicit the money, so you have to think about, okay, I need a paragraph to explain why I'm doing this. That changes the event, and you approach it with a different kind of intention. And I found that the events we connected to the QEP last year were genuinely improved, even when they were only tangentially connected. And so I really think this process can work to help us improve things we're already doing. And that's, I suppose, one of the reasons I was surprised to learn you wanted us to come, because I kind of thought, well, we're doing things that we were already hoping to do, wanting to do, but they do seem to be consistent with the goals of the QEP.
Well, that's kind of our best case scenario, and when we review the proposals for funding, we really do look at that. Okay, you've done this, what do we say, Faculty Friday. How are you gonna make that thing you've already been doing, how do you make that relate to the QEP? And sometimes it's obvious it already did. Well, good for you, you got a head start, you thought of this before we did, so fantastic. And sometimes it's, well, if you tweak it in this way, then we'll give you the money for it, so.
You know, it's really about enhancing the student's experience too.
Well, it
I
is,
think all of
yeah.
our people worked real hard on this because they genuinely want these students to get a little richer experience.
Well, and I think the what I love about our QEP is everybody wants this for our students, and everybody is trying to orient their curriculum toward this anyway. This is what we've always been about. It's just a matter of making it clear to students that this is what we're trying to do. Just make it, so that they can articulate it. We actually have to go because we have to go over there for our next session, which is a demonstration of the e-portfolio, and the actual live people from Pathbright are here to show us how to use it, which last time they sent us a video, which well, you can ask questions. I mean, you could, but this is a real person. So,
Different perspective.